As we continue our discussion on cultural differences in how we perceive ourselves, we'll talk very briefly here about personality and differences in personality. And it's pretty clear that different cultures encourage different personality structures. Well, here in the United States, they have found that people, what happens is they ask people, how important is your personality, how important is it to you, all right? And so they kind of made these comparisons here, and what they found was that people that had never moved in their lives, this is kind of a reflection of independence versus interdependence, or individualism versus collectivism, sort of, kind of. And you see people that have never moved are more individualistic in this way. They emphasize personal traits more than group memberships. But it's, not a huge thing. But if you see people that have moved once, or I believe my face is underneath, I think it says two or more, would be my guess, right? I can't remember. No, it's even on that screen, it's blocked out. So you can see the more people have moved, because what happens is when you move, you get new groups. Groups change all the time, but your personality is, if you're creative, you're creative. If you if I was creative when I lived in Wisconsin, I was creative when I lived in New York, and I was creative when I lived in Pennsylvania, and I was creative when I lived in Missouri, and I was creative when I lived in Texas. So every place I go, the only thing that's consistent is me. So within American psychology, there's a lot of personality theories, and one of them is this notion of the Big Five model of personality, which, very briefly, the notion is that if you want to describe somebody's personality and you describe them along these five dimensions, you almost have a photograph of sorts of who they are. So, how open are you to experience new things, conscientiousness, dependable reliability, how extroverted, how outgoing, agreeableness, how warm and friendly, and neurotic, how much you're kind of anxious, kinds of stuff. And it turns out that some researchers found that the Big Five model, or this idea that you can describe somebody or get a snapshot of somebody with these five characteristics, seems to hold fairly well around the world. But what you find is that when you go to different cultures, you'll find a different pattern. That is, as a general rule, Americans are more extroverted, and Southeast Asians are less extroverted as a rule, but you can still describe them in terms of these five things. And so here is what they did was they took the United States as a standard. You can see they set it to 50. So just as a reference point. And so if America is neurotic level 50, you find South Koreans and Russians, oh no, in particular French, are much more much more neurotic. If you look at extroversion, you can see if you set America as a 50, South Koreans are way low on an extroversion scale. Openness, you find what Germans are much more friendly and open. Agreeableness, the Indians, Marathi Indians, are extreme. And when it comes to conscientiousness, the Japanese are very low, and that surprises me, but very low. And so you can see that, and then the Indians are very high again. So you can see that it's the same five descriptors, but you get radically different average maps when you get done. And so this is a fascinating study I came across by accident a couple years back, and it looks at, this is Switzerland, and the United States has different states. They have different cantons, right? The different cantons in Switzerland. And you can see here that even within Switzerland, there's great variability in the five-factor model. You see there's five different maps here, and you can see in different parts of the country that they're and what you find is that the ethnic makeup of Switzerland is quite varied. And if you know a map of Europe, the people in the south of Switzerland will have a lot of Italian influence. People in the northern parts of Switzerland will have a lot of German influence. People in Switzerland on the west side of the country will have a lot of, French influence. And so you're going to find that this multicultural, it's one country will have this quite fluid. And so the article that is linked here describes it and says, well, in order for an individual to adapt to a particular region or canton in Switzerland, they should ideally exhibit some similar characteristics. And so it does quite a good job of saying, though there are some radical differences in the Big Five personality structure of peoples from different nations, cultures, or even within the same, that it is adaptive to do so.